Chapter 25. The Insider's annual strategy meeting normally alternated locations between the Presidio and the Samuels Ranch. This year, they headed back to the ranch. Breakfast on the first morning was simply wonderful. The coffee was hot. The orange juice and milk were ice cold. The meal included eggs, bacon, sausage, hash browns, crisp but not burnt, and biscuits and gravy. By the time breakfast was over, everyone was in a good mood. In the conference room, Rada and Barbara were given the two seats closest to the warm, radiant fire. The Secretary General took a seat far away from the heat. Too much warmth, and he became sleepy. He didn't want to doze off during this important meeting. Michael plunged right in. "Theodore, tell us about the Millennium World Peace Summit. How did it go?" "It was terrific," Joyner reported. "The religious leaders signed on to the commitment for global peace, and the political leaders unanimously approved the Millennium Declaration. As you know, these two documents contain the same principles, only stated in a little different way. Now we are in the process of setting up the liaison between the religious leaders and the United Nations. It will be called the World Council of Religious Leaders. We are on our way to making it fully functional." The Secretary General spoke up. Theodore's speech was masterful. He said what most of the religious delegates were already thinking. "I have to say that the meeting far exceeded my expectations." Before he was done, he had every one of them clapping their hands, stomping their feet, and dancing in the aisles. "It was like being at a charismatic revival," the secretary laughed. "An alliance between politics and religion will open the door to true global unity," Arachov stated confidently. "Theodore, you may have accomplished the greatest breakthrough toward the New World Order in the last 50 years. Great job!" Everyone in the room applauded. Bill Baker of the World Federalist spoke up. "I suppose everyone has heard by now that the President of the United States did sign the International Criminal Court Statute. That's very good news, even though it was done on the last possible day." "Why did he fight it for so long, Bill?" Theodore Joyner inquired. Baker explained. "The President understands that this is an instrument of global governance that he will not be able to control since the U.S. has no veto power over the court. He realizes this is the most dramatic erosion of national sovereignty since the UN was formed. That's why he was so reluctant to sign. However, he didn't want the U.S. to be left without a say in the court's future development. So in the end, he signed." "How long will it be until this World Court officially takes power?" Joyner asked. All eyes in the room turned to Morris Samuels. He was the expert when it came to the functioning of UN operations. Morris began to explain. "When 60 national parliaments have ratified the ICC, it will become international law. At the present rate of ratification, the process could take up to 10 years. However, if some kind of global crisis occurs, the ratification might be completed much sooner." "This may be a foolish question," Joyner interrupted, "but who decided that 60 ratifications would bring this World Court to power? There are 190 nations in the UN. So 50% plus 1 would require 96 ratifications. How did the ICC conference settle on 60? Samuels explained. "The writers of the ICC statute knew that securing 96 ratifications might be impossible. Therefore, a decision was made that once half of the nations voting for the ICC at Rome ratified, the International Court would assume power." Joyner questioned further in amazement. "Once 60 nations decide to impose a world court on the world's 190 nations, it becomes international law binding on every nation on Earth? 60 nations can exercise power over the other 130 nations against their will? How does the UN get away with it?" The Secretary General spoke up. "Theodore, you have to understand the politics of the world. Most world leaders and UN ambassadors favor world government. Yet the people they represent are largely opposed to surrendering their sovereignty to the coming New World Order. Therefore, the world leaders know what is going on and are glad to allow it to happen. They can get the world government that they favor while voting against it. Thus, they do not raise the ire of their people. At the same time, the masses that oppose world government never look into what is going on behind the scenes and don't realize how these things are being done. The few that do are ignored by the mainstream media. As a result, they have no appreciable effect on the outcome. It's like this, Theodore, Samuels interjected. We in this room know that without the implementation of a world government, humankind will destroy themselves. Therefore, we have an obligation to do whatever it takes to save the masses from inevitable destruction, whether or not they agree with it. Interesting, Joyner commented, raising his eyebrows with a smile. Morris Samuels turned to Arachoff. Michael, what do you see as the critical developments that we should be working toward this year? It was obvious that Michael was well prepared for the question. There have been many important developments during the last few years, he began. The formation of the United Religions was a major achievement. The Millennium Peace Summit and the Millennium Summit were huge successes. The acceptance of the Millennium Declaration as the global agenda was critical. The marriage of politics and religion was essential to the world's future. As we predicted last year, Y2K was a non-event. However, it served to mandate the upgrade of the world's computer systems. That will be vital as we implement a system for the efficient management of the world. All of the pieces of our new world order are pretty much in place. We must now simply develop and perfect them. Implementation may seem slow right now, but when a world crisis comes, and there will be one, we will be able to accelerate dramatically. Our plan should be to achieve the ratification of the ICC and continue establishing the liaison between world political leaders and world religious leaders. The development of international law must continue as rapidly as possible. Implementation of the Kyoto Treaty must be aggressively promoted. Without this, our main instrument of wealth redistribution and international control over the U.S. will be thwarted. As each of us works in our particular spheres, world events will create opportunities that we cannot predict today. But rest assured, they will happen. They always do. Chapter 26. Michael and Rada boarded the plane to Israel with great anticipation. The unexpected invitation had come from Israel's Peace Institute and had been hand-delivered by Israel's ambassador to the UN. The Peace Prize they wanted to bestow on Michael was in recognition for the large number of Jews that he had allowed to leave the Soviet Union under his presidency. When the plane touched down on the tarmac at Ben Gurion International Airport, Rada looked out the window. So this is the promised land, she thought to herself. It looked like any other land, yet Rada found herself wondering if any of the legends surrounding this special place could possibly be true. Michael and Rada were met at the airport by Israeli Foreign Minister Yossi Dor and by officials from the Peace Institute. As they traveled from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, Arachov's eyes drank in the historic land. He noted with interest the bustling modern city of Tel Aviv, but he was filled with anticipation for his first glimpse of Jerusalem. Darkness had settled by the time they reached the outskirts of the holy city. As they approached the city, Arachov was not prepared for what he saw. The walls around the old city of Jerusalem were strategically spotlighted to emphasize their splendor. Rounding a curve, the Arachovs caught their first stunning glimpse of the Temple Mount. The awesome sight of the Dome of the Rock with its lighted gold dome against the darkened sky was like no other sight on earth. "It's beautiful!" Rada exclaimed. "Is the location of the Dome of the Rock on the same site where the first and second Jewish temples stood?" Arachov asked the foreign minister. "No one knows for sure," Dor replied. "Some contend it is the very place, and therefore the Dome of the Rock must come down. Others believe the temple stood north of the Dome of the Rock in the large open area that you see there. When their motorcade arrived at the King David Hotel, Arachoff was reminded of all the kings and presidents who had stayed in this famous hotel in years past. Before leaving Michael and Rada for the night, Foreign Minister Dor promised to personally escort them around Jerusalem the next day. At 8 o'clock the next morning, Rada and Michael stepped into the Mercedes limousine provided by the Israeli government. Michael greeted their host. "Good morning, Mr. Foreign Minister. It's so kind of you to take your valuable time to show us around the Holy Land." "It's my pleasure, I assure you," Dor replied. Their limousine wound its way through the streets of Jerusalem, moving in the direction of the Mount of Olives. They stepped out of their vehicle to see the Mount of Olives looking out with its breathtaking view. From where they were standing, the Temple Mount with the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock were perhaps a block away, just across the Kidron Valley. Yossi Dor began his explanations. "I brought you here first because you see the entire city of Jerusalem from this place. The New Testament teaches that it was from the Mount of Olives that Jesus prophesied the destruction of the Second Temple. He actually said that not one stone would be left upon another. Of course, the temple was totally destroyed by the Romans a few years later in 70 AD. It was also from here that Jesus made his triumphal entry through the Golden Gate that you see across the way. That happened 1 week before he was crucified. Over to the right, down below, is the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus prayed into the night. It was there his betrayal by Judas took place. As Michael listened to the words of the foreign minister, he attempted to comprehend what went through the mind of Christ during those fateful days. His actions in this very area had impacted the world and changed it forever. A feeling of strange resentment rose up within Arachoff toward this Jesus who claimed to be the Messiah. "You failed," Michael thought, mentally addressing Jesus. "You claim to be the Prince of Peace, but there has been nothing but war since you left the earth. I will not fail. I will bring true peace to the human race." "Michael! Michael!" Rada's voice finally pierced through the vivid thoughts captivating his mind. "Michael, are you all right?" Rada asked with considerable concern. Yes, I'm fine," Michael replied apologetically. "I was just trying to drink in the historic impact of this place. How long were you waiting on me?" "It was only about 10 minutes, Rada answered. "It's all right." The rest of the day was spent visiting the Western Wall, the Temple Mount, and the Garden Tomb. After being inside the tomb, Arachoff told himself, "It means nothing. It's a myth. I know he didn't rise from the dead." Still, the tomb was empty. It haunted him the rest of the day. When it was evening, Foreign Minister Dor asked, "Are you ready to return to the hotel?" Michael replied quickly, "I have a request." "What is it?" Dor asked anxiously. "We want you to be able to do whatever you would like." "Would it be possible for you to take me back to the Temple Mount?" Arachoff requested. "And could I be left alone there for a little while?" "Why, certainly," Dor replied immediately. "We'll go right now." "No," Michael responded quickly. "Drop Rada off at the King David. I'd like to be there alone. And I don't want to keep you any longer." "That would be fine, I'm sure, Mr. Arachoff," Dor answered. "However, my government would severely frown upon me if I left you totally without protection. I'm sure you can understand that." "Yes, certainly," Michael replied quickly. "If the bodyguards could keep watch from a distance, that would be fine. I'll try not to be too long." Dor bid the Arachoffs good night, and Rada returned to the room. The limousine turned back toward the Temple Mount. Dor had called ahead, making all the necessary arrangements with the Waqf, the Muslim authority that administered the Temple Mount. By the time they arrived back at the entrance, the Muslim authorities were expecting him. "Come in, Mr. Arachoff. Welcome," the head caliph greeted him warmly. "Thank you for extending this courtesy to me," Arachoff responded. "I won't be long." "It's all right," the caliph assured. "Take all the time you would like." With the security detail following far behind, Arachoff moved slowly across the stones of the Temple Mount floor. It seemed as though his sensibilities were suddenly heightened. He felt the history of the place and the struggles that had transpired there. He had the distinct impression of being surrounded by the forces of destiny. Michael was strangely drawn to the southeast portion of the Temple Mount. Standing right in the corner, he was able to take in the incredible view. Looking to the extreme left, he saw the Dome of the Rock. Looking at a 90-degree angle to his left, he saw the Kidron Valley. To the right of the Kidron was the Garden of Gethsemane. Then straight ahead was the ascent to the Mount of Olives. Earlier in the day, Yossi Dor had explained to him that it was on this pinnacle that the temptation of Jesus had taken place. It was here that Satan had come to him, offering him the kingdoms of the world. As Arachoff rehearsed these things in his mind, the wind picked up velocity, whipping through his hair. A thought presented itself to his mind. If Satan had offered you your long-dreamed-of world government, what would you have done? Michael rolled the proposition around in his mind. I can't see that Jesus made the right decision. There's been nothing but war and more war ever since, he thought to himself. The longer Arachoff dwelt on these things, the more plausible the proposition seemed. Michael couldn't tell exactly when it happened, but at some point the experience took the form of reality. He didn't know if the experience that followed was imagined or if it had actually happened. The spirit in front of him began to speak. Michael, long ago you were marked by destiny. I chose you and nurtured you until this moment. Do you know that this is true? The being inquired. I know it is true, Michael responded. I have known it since I was a boy. The time is drawing near when your destiny will be fulfilled. Even though you have been given outstanding gifts, you will not be able to bear this great responsibility without my assistance. I am willing to help you, but I must be able to depend on your complete obedience. The kingdoms of this world are mine, and I give them to whomsoever I choose. Michael Arachoff, I have chosen you. Will you accept this destiny by bowing before me in worship and obedience? Michael's answer came slowly but surely. I will. He dropped to his knees there on the pinnacle of the Temple Mount. As he bowed his head to the ground before the being in front of him, he felt a surge of energy flow through him. The being spoke again. Michael Arachoff, because you have accepted this challenge, I now anoint you child of destiny, son of perdition, and you shall reign over all the earth. Arachoff lifted his head just in time to see the being vanish. The last thing he saw was the flash of a gold pentagram around his neck. At that moment, he knew it was Lucifer. Chapter 27. Michael returned to the King David around 9 p.m. Radha was waiting. Would you like dinner? She asked. I don't think so, Michael replied. Could you order perhaps a bowl of soup and some coffee to be sent to the room? That's all I want. Order whatever you want for yourself. While waiting for their food to be delivered, Michael sat quietly in the corner of the room. In his mind, he was replaying the evening's experience, trying to recapture every moment. He was a man of vision, but he had never experienced anything as clearly as what he had experienced on the Temple Mount. He was certain he would do what Jesus had failed to do. He could hear the words as distinctly as when they were first spoken. I now anoint you, child of destiny, son of perdition. And then the flash of the pentagram. Did you enjoy your visit to the Temple Mount? Radha asked. She sensed something extraordinary was going on within Michael. She wanted to know what had happened, if he was willing to talk about it. There is something about that place I don't fully understand, Michael replied. I don't think there is another place on earth quite like it. That's as far as Michael would go. He shared almost everything with Radha, but not this. The encounter was too personal, too intimate. Foreign Minister Dor picked them up the next morning at their usual time of 8 a.m. Good morning, Radha, Michael. They had been together enough so that they now spoke to each other on a first-name basis. Michael, did you enjoy your time at the Temple Mount last night? I did, Yossi, came Michael's reply. It's quite an unusual place. Did you know that there have been more wars fought over the Temple Mount than any other place on the planet? Yossi inquired. It seems as though all the great world leaders can't leave it alone. Even if they control the world, they seem compelled to try to lay claim to this site. Why is that? Rada asked. I don't know, Yossi responded. The religious Jews say it is because Jerusalem is the place where God chose to place his name. It says that 37 times in the Old Testament. The rabbis teach that the temporal rulers become seized with a compulsion to rule that which God has said only he would rule. That's so interesting, Rada exclaimed. I wonder if there's anything to it. Their schedule called for them to be in Tiberias in northern Israel by evening. They took the route through the West Bank by Jericho and up through the fertile Jordan Valley. As they moved through the West Bank, Foreign Minister Dora explained that this was the area known as the Occupied Territories. It is also the biblical area known as Judea, he added. So this is part of the Promised Land as described in the Bible? Rada asked. Yes, Dora answered. The biblical boundaries of the Promised Land extended from the River of Egypt in the south to Lebanon in the north, from the Mediterranean in the west to the Euphrates River in the northeast. The promised area even extended into part of what is now Jordan. So who lives here now? Michael asked. Dora explained. The Romans drove most of the Jews out of this area in 70 A.D. when they conquered Jerusalem, destroying our Second Temple. After almost 2,000 years of Jewish exile, the UN partitioned the land between Jews and Arabs in 1947. This resulted in an Arab-initiated war. For the next 19 years after that war, Jordan controlled the West Bank area, the territory between Jerusalem and the Jordan River. However, never having laid claim to the land, Jordan never annexed it, so it remained disputed territory during this time. Then came the 1967 war, during which Israel conquered the land all the way to the Jordan River. Today, approximately 200,000 Jews live there in what is called the settlements. 1.6 million Palestinians live there also. Ownership of this area is one of the most difficult disputes we have. The Jews know it as part of their Promised Land, and yet the Arabs feel that the Jews are intruders here. As they move northward through the Jordan Valley, Michael turned to Dora. What do the Jews believe concerning their Messiah? Most Jews believe that a man, an anointed man, will come someday to bring peace to Israel. Secular Jews pay little attention to it. They contend that we must live our lives for today. However, the religious Jews in Israel believe that we are now living in the Messianic age. They believe that the rebirth of the nation of Israel indicates this, and regard the appearance of the Messiah as imminent. What do most Jews think the Messiah will do when he comes? Erechoff probed. Rada looked at him inquisitively. He was certainly showing more interest in this than normal. She wondered silently if this had anything to do with his visit to the Temple Mount the previous evening. He had been markedly different ever since his return. It basically boils down to this, Dora explained. When Messiah comes, he will do two things. He will bring peace and security to Israel, and he will rebuild our temple. Interesting, Erechoff said thoughtfully. As they entered the outskirts of Tiberias, Michael and Rada caught their first view of the Sea of Galilee. Michael drank in every detail of the geography. Knowing that he was coming to Israel, he had taken time to read the Gospel of Luke, which tells of the life of Jesus. Though he did not believe the biblical teachings about Jesus, he found himself in awe of the territory about which most of the Gospels were written. He wondered what Jesus was like when he walked in this area nearly 2,000 years before. Despite these thoughts, Michael reminded himself that his mission would ultimately supersede that of Jesus. Where Jesus failed to establish a world government, I will succeed, he thought to himself. He failed to bring peace to the earth, but I will soon outlaw war forever. Before retiring for the evening, Michael and Rada sat on the balcony of their hotel room overlooking the Sea of Galilee. Turning to Rada, Michael mused. And to think this was the headquarters of the simple carpenter who influenced the world more than any other human being. Rada smiled as she replied, You have to admit that it's more than a little awe-inspiring. Michael, do you think Jesus walked on water as the Bible records? Oh, come now, Rada, Michael replied. You don't think that event happened, do you? The myth of this place must be getting to you, my dear. Rada laughed self-consciously. Of course you are right. It was a foolish question. Michael wanted to talk. Radha, we need to realize that our mission is more important than that of Jesus. Just think. Jesus failed in his efforts to bring peace on earth, but we will succeed. Jesus was never able to unify mankind, but that is our destiny. Radha had never heard Michael speak with such conviction. She could tell that he believed every word he was saying, and she believed in him. Radha lovingly leaned over and kissed him on the cheek. "Let's go to bed, Michael," she said. "It's been a long day." Chapter 28. The Peace Awards ceremony was scheduled for 8 a.m. the next morning. It was to be held in a beautiful area along the shores of the Sea of Galilee. Foreign Minister Dorr was there, along with the mayor of Tiberias and other dignitaries. Michael's good friend, Simon Purvis, had traveled all the way from Jerusalem to be a part of the festivities. Miriam Edelstein of the Peace Institute presented the award. Mr. Arachoff, your contribution to the Jewish people and to the state of Israel has been outstanding. For many years, Jewish people in the Soviet Union had longed to make their way to Eretz Israel, but they had been hindered by government regulations. Under your presidency, the restrictions were lifted, allowing the yearnings of many years to be realized. Some 650,000 individuals were able to finally come home because of your assistance. For this, the Jewish people owe you a tremendous debt of gratitude. On behalf of these individuals and the entire nation of Israel, I am honored to present you Israel's highest peace prize, the Peace Institute Award. Upon presenting the award, 25 doves were released into the air. One of them hovered near Arachoff, finally landing squarely on his head. Arachoff stood still. The crowd applauded wildly. As the people began to disperse, Miriam Edelstein came to tell the Arachoffs goodbye. "What a wonderful ceremony," she exclaimed. "Do you realize that in all the years we have been presenting this award, we have never had one of the doves land on the head of the award winner? I think it was an omen. You truly are a man of peace." In that moment, Radha's eyes locked with Michael's. They smiled at each other knowingly, both of them thinking, if she only knew. Their flight back to the United States was scheduled to leave that evening. As the limousine sped toward Tel Aviv, Arachoff was deep in thought, mentally reviewing his experiences in the land of Israel. As they traveled, it became crystal clear to Michael that the Middle East was the focal point of the clash between two intractable world forces, Islam and Judeo-Christian beliefs. That's it, Michael thought to himself. Peace is impossible as long as both forces claim exclusive possession of truth. The key to peace is to teach the human race to show tolerance and respect for all religious beliefs. Michael glowed with inner satisfaction, realizing that he now understood the cornerstone to peace on earth and the coming New World Order. On the plane ride home, Michael discussed his conclusions with Radha. There simply cannot be peace when people claim to possess the truth to the exclusion of all others, Michael expounded. It is the formula for unending conflict. That's what we witnessed between Israel and the Muslims. So what we suspected back in college has proven to be true, Radha observed. When Politburo member Gorky said that religious conflict was the source of all war, he was right. Michael stated with total conviction, ultimately, we will have to outlaw religious exclusiveness. It must become the most hateful and poisonous crime of all. Do you have any ideas as to how that can be accomplished? Radha asked. Actually, I do, Michael replied quickly. The Genocide Treaty outlaws doing harm to minorities or groups, whether they are racial, religious, or sexual. It not only outlaws physical harm, but it also prohibits causing mental harm, such as the deep hatred that exists in both Palestinian and Israeli children. It must be outlawed. Michael, does that include controlling what parents teach their children? Radha asked with a certain amount of skepticism. It's the only way, Michael declared vehemently. Until this world adopts proper thinking, and until we establish a culture of peace, wars will continue. Radha began to understand Michael's intentions.